Power. I'm Summer El-Shahad. On today's program, drug money.
The company made about $180 billion selling 12 drugs. They paid $2.3 billion in fines. That is a good business plan.
The United States healthcare industry is the world's biggest, with $300 billion a year spent on prescription drugs and rising. For many, these drugs have brought undeniable benefits. But recent months have seen health scandal after health scandal making headlines in the US. Two of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies have been fined billions of dollars after investigations into their secret working practices. What these cases have revealed will change the way the drug industry is perceived forever. Revelation after revelation has emerged of pervasive fraud, fatal side effects, and of huge kickbacks paid to doctors. This investigation by Melanie Newman and Chris Woods reveals how healthcare became unhealthy profit.
Thanks to modern medicine, many of us are living longer, healthier lives than ever before. But here in America, a disturbing trend is emerging of drug companies putting profits before patients.
There's so much money to be made in stealing from the United States healthcare system.
One of the things we are now looking at is going after executives in these companies and holding them personally accountable.
A decade ago, David was prescribed Risperdal for a psychiatric illness, a drug made by Johnson & Johnson. US authorities had never approved Risperdal for treating his disorder. It had devastating consequences, he says. He's now wheelchair-bound with diabetes and Parkinson's. In a lawsuit against Johnson & Johnson, he blames Risperdal. His lawyers have asked that we protect his identity.
All I can say is about Risperdal is, like, I'm holding myself together right now, but between the Parkinson's and the diabetes, it really has done the job on me. It's a bad drug, and it should be banned. I'm a living example. No life.
US regulators have ruled that Johnson & Johnson misled doctors about potentially fatal risks associated with the drug, including diabetes.
And did it help you at all?
No, no. Psychologically, it didn't do anything for me. It just made me sick.
You know, the manufacturer of this drug, Johnson & Johnson,
Yes.
what would you like to say to them?
Take that drug off the market.
Recently, the FDA required manufacturers of several atypical antipsychotics, including Zyprexa, Seroquel, and Risperdal, to add warnings about the increased risk.
David is just one of 2,000 people across the US bringing legal actions against Johnson & Johnson, which says the claims are without merit. The US government and several states are suing in related cases. But this story is just one of many putting the drug industry in the dock. Most of the leading pharmaceutical companies in the United States have been fined for fraud. A common type of fraud is known as off-label marketing, which means advising doctors to prescribe drugs for unapproved uses. It's called fraud against the government, as Medicare ends up paying for drugs that might not work.
Pharmaceutical fraud is one of our top 3 threats. Everybody is touched by these frauds in the extent that when you look at the billions of dollars that go into health care for the United States, a good percent, 3 to 10% of that is believed to be siphoned off in a fraud. That's money that could be going to very needy patients.
And things seem to be getting worse. Dr. Dan Carlett, who blogs about the drugs industry, has tracked the changes.
In the mid to late 1990s, this culture of inevitability of creating blockbuster drugs, I think, began to filter throughout the industries, all of the companies. And it became an issue where if you were a drug company and you did not have a blockbuster drug and you weren't making at least $1 billion a year on a drug, you were losing out, and you had to get yourself together. And the way to get yourself together was to skirt the regulations, to not be afraid of being corrupt.
But the US government is fighting back. In the last 2 years alone, it's fined 6 of America's top 10 pharmaceutical companies for fraud. Investigations are ongoing against another 3. Of the 10, only Roche remains untouched. In this period, the industry has had to pay out over $5 billion in fines. And at the top of the list sits Pfizer, the world's biggest drug company, with a global net profit of $8.6 billion. In September 2009, Pfizer settled civil and criminal charges with the federal government for illegally marketing 4 drugs.
The Pfizer Corporation just paid $2.3 billion for fraud. It's the biggest fraud case in U.S. history, biggest criminal fine, biggest False Claims Act case. The company made about $180 billion selling 12 drugs. They paid $2.3 billion in fines. That is a good business plan.
And Pfizer certainly had an interesting way of doing business. Witnesses in the case revealed just how the company persuaded doctors to prescribe its drugs. It entertained them in strip clubs. It told them that the blues teenagers feel when they don't make the football team were signs of treatable depression. And it paid them to endorse Pfizer drugs. One doctor received $150,000 in a year. Details of Pfizer's behavior came to light thanks to a small band of whistleblowers. Glenn DeMott was a top Pfizer rep selling the drug Bextra and earning $100,000 a year.
They were training us to say things to physicians that were not accurate. Bextra was not approved to be used for acute pain. And we were out there trying to get standing orders for acute pain. So that just wasn't going to work for me. I didn't even understand why we were doing it.
When DeMott raised concerns with his bosses about their marketing tactics, he was forced out of his job and hasn't worked since.
You sort of get isolated, and then they just start throwing things at you to make you uncomfortable. I was never told exactly why I was on administrative leave. I repeatedly asked the question, but they would not respond.
DeMott took his concerns to the Department of Justice and filed a legal claim. 5 years later, he shared $7.4 million from the Pfizer settlement with 4 other whistleblowers. Pfizer told us it accepted full responsibility for improper past promotional practices related to Bextra and 1 other drug. But it denied all other allegations made by the whistleblowers. DeMott is one of a growing army of whistleblowers exposing medical corruption across America. This is largely thanks to a US law called qui tam, from the Latin on behalf of the king. It allows individuals with a knowledge of fraud against the government to bring a legal case on its behalf and share in the proceeds.
So if a whistleblower is successful in pursuing his or her case, they can realize 20–30% of the proceeds, depending on the facts.
Lewis Morris is chief lawyer for the gigantic US Health Department. He's increasingly using qui tam and whistleblowers to expose drug industry corruption.
They bring in information that we would not likely discover just through looking at documents, for example. They've been in the corporate suites when the fraud was hatched. They were in the marketing department when the scheme to enlist doctors was cooked up. So they bring in tremendous intelligence into our effort.
But qui tam has fierce critics. Harvard University's Professor Thomas Stossel, who has received millions of dollars in advisory fees from drug companies, is one of them. He's adamant that qui tam is all about clever lawyers selecting isolated evidence from a sea of documents.
We have a prosecutorial extortion racket. It seems there's a lot of emphasis on emails and off-the-cuff statements that people make in the heat of their enthusiasm to sell products, and that whether that's worth billions of dollars, I'm not so sure.
The number of drug companies and related industries involved in key TAM cases has soared in recent years. Today, there are almost 1,000 outstanding key TAM healthcare cases, each of which has the potential to cost the industry millions. And the law is having a longer-term impact on how the drug industry operates. Pfizer wasn't just fined, it also had to sign binding agreements forcing it to publish certain information. These agreements and the cases themselves have blown apart the secretive world of Big Pharma. For the first time, we can see millions of dollars in payments to doctors throughout the US.
The amount of money, the amount of payola, the kickbacks that doctors get is absolutely jaw-dropping. In the cancer industry, the amount of money they were making was 60–70% of their money was based on kickbacks. But again and again and again, it's just astounding how little money it takes for a doctor to sell out a patient.
Dr. Dan Carlett was once on the industry's payroll, giving talks to fellow doctors about drugs.
Obviously, a Fortune 500 company paying you money to talk to doctors, they're expecting something out of the bargain, and I knew that. What I wasn't aware of was how strong the pressures and the incentives would be for me to tweak and slant the kinds of, the ways that I deliver the information to the doctors.
Drug companies Pfizer, Eli Lilly, GSK and Merck now publish physician payment figures online. In 2009 alone, they paid doctors in the United States an estimated $200 million. These vast sums pouring into the medical profession are having far-reaching consequences. Lawyer Steve Scheller has seen this firsthand. A veteran of medical lawsuits, he's now involved in a fight with Johnson & Johnson. We've heard Risperdal accused of causing diabetes and Parkinson's. Scheller says that in adolescent boys, the drug can cause other serious complications.
We have, at this time, approximately 50 children and teenagers who've developed gynecomastia, which is growing breasts, as a result of risperidol or Risperdal. Now, several of our clients have had mastectomies, double mastectomies, as a result of, if you're a teenage boy and you're running around with breasts, and obviously it's going to affect you very, very substantially. It's one of the worst injuries I've ever seen in terms of its permanent effect.
So were the parents of these children who've developed breasts aware that this was a possible side effect of the drug?
No. The parents are usually never aware of it, never understand that it was a potential side effect.
One of these parents is Eileen Stein. She's one of Scheller's clients and is fighting for compensation for her 14-year-old son.
Abby, come here.
He was treated with Risperdal for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But the drug had never been licensed by US regulators to treat his condition.
Age 5 or 6, he was prescribed Risperdal. And I guess within 2 to 3 months of taking it, my husband and I noticed he had a weight gain and what we would call man boobs. So I called the psychiatrist and I told her, my son is experiencing, or we just noticed this, and she said, okay, let's stop that right away.
How visible are your son's breasts?
Well, unfortunately, even with clothing, you can see them. I mean, to put it bluntly, he's actually larger than like what you consider a flat-chested woman. It started to affect him really emotionally when he went to school and another student actually said to him, "You have boobs," or "Why do you have boobs?" I think it should be taken off the market, or at least in bold capital letters, warning.
So how did a boy end up taking a drug that made him grow breasts? Federal investigators are looking into claims that Johnson & Johnson illegally marketed Risperdal for use in children, including those with ADHD. The company was paying some of the most influential doctors in the field. Professor Joseph Biederman is a psychiatrist at Harvard Medical School. He was called as a witness in the Risperdal lawsuits and is speaking here under oath.
Full professor? What rank are you?
Full professor.
What's after that?
God.
Did you say God?
Yeah.
Biederman is an authority on bipolar disorder. He's helped fuel a huge rise in young children diagnosed with the condition. And he's strongly advocated using Risperdal and other antipsychotic drugs to treat them. In 2008, a US Senate committee said Biederman had not declared to Harvard most of the $1.6 million in outside income he'd received over a 7-year period. This was income from pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical companies. Johnson & Johnson was one of them. The company also paid for a research center at Harvard University headed by Biederman. He says it was set up to understand psychiatric disorders in children. But the Senate's investigation shows Johnson & Johnson had different aims. Before any research was done, the company made clear what the outcome would be. It would prove Risperdal was effective and safe.
I'm asking you if you agree that you are one of the most forceful advocates of the aggressive treatment of preschoolers.
I am.
Would it surprise you it's over 20% of all the Risperdal that's used is used in kids?
I have no idea how much Risperdal is used in children.
Do you consider yourself in any way responsible for that?
No. Okay.
Johnson & Johnson told us it did not direct the content of the centre's research nor the conclusions, and says it only ever promoted Risperdal for its FDA-approved indications. Dr. Biederman says his work has focused on allowing children to have the same access as adults to safe, effective, and in some cases life-saving medications. And he says he made full disclosure of his outside income in accordance with Harvard rules. With so many drug scandals hitting the headlines, the country's regulators are being swamped.
Since I have type 2 diabetes, I try to do what my doctor says.
But her blood sugar is still too high.
Avandia was once the world's best-selling diabetes drug. It earned its maker, GlaxoSmithKline, billions of dollars. But it's now thought to have caused 100,000 heart attacks in the US alone.
You as physicians and the public had a right to know that there was a major concern about this drug.
In July, the US Food and Drug Administration held hearings into the dangers of Avandia, which may lead to the drug being banned. Its license has already been suspended in Saudi Arabia. An investigation by the US Senate's Finance Committee found the totality of evidence suggests GSK was aware of the possible cardiac risks associated with Avandia years before such evidence became public. And that rather than sounding the alarm, the company focused on strategies to minimize or misrepresent findings that Avandia may increase cardiovascular risk, and sought ways to downplay findings that a competing drug might reduce cardiovascular risk. GSK, a British company, is still trying to prevent heart attack warnings being printed on its boxes.
There's alternative medications that are equally, if not more effective, that don't have the same dangers. So why do you allow this one on the market? I would hope they ban it.
A 13,000-strong class action suit has also been launched against GSK. GSK told us, results from 6 controlled clinical trials show that Avandia does not increase the overall risk of heart attack, stroke or death. As a result, we believe that when used in the appropriate patient and in accordance with labelling, Avandia is a safe and effective treatment option for type 2 diabetes. GSK added that patient safety was a priority and that the company has diligently shared data with regulators around the world and worked with them to ensure that the Avandia product labelling is updated to add safety information as new data becomes available.
You may might be entitled to substantial monetary...
Many of America's leading pharmaceutical corporations appear mired in corruption. Can massive fines alone stop the rot? The US government is reaching for ever stronger powers to control the industry.
One of the things we are now looking at is going after executives in these companies and holding them personally accountable. This responsible corporate official doctrine will allow us to go to a CEO or a vice president of marketing and say, I don't even need to have proof that you specifically hatched this scheme, but you could have stopped it. You had the responsibility and the authority to stop it, and you didn't. So you have to leave this company.
And as this investigation has learnt, the Department of Health is even considering breaking up drug companies found guilty of corrupt and unethical practices.
In the drug industry, we have a case that is moving to final resolution, where we are going to be requiring a subsidiary and all the package of the subsidiary, its assets, its products, must be sold off to a third party. The parent company can no longer own that part of the company.
No drug company would speak to us on camera. The industry body did issue a statement saying it believes that compliance with healthcare fraud laws is critically important and that it seeks a balance between appropriate enforcement and preventing unnecessary litigation. Thousands of US doctors continue to take cash payments from the industry and argue that they're doing nothing wrong at all.
My wife and I go to Zambia twice a year. We do medical and dental work in rural communities. Could never have done that if I had to live off my academic salary. So freedom, the freedom to do things such as work with industry, which I think adds value, everything I do I think adds value, has enabled good patient care in a place where I never would have been able to do it before. So I'm proud of the money I've made, and I wish I could make more.
Can you put a figure on it? If you had to estimate how much you got from...
Millions. And more people ought to say that.
For others, the drug industry is less the solution, more part of the problem.
Industry has a deeply entrenched culture of corruption. This is ripping off our oldest, our sickest, our poorest. We're not getting better health care anymore from the pharmaceutical industry. We're getting bigger prices.
And some, like David, now see themselves as victims of an industry's search for unhealthy profits.
I will not take another pill. The drug industry is too powerful over small people or the average person. They don't know what they're giving them. They know what they're giving them, but the people don't know what they're getting. That's all I want to say.
That's it for this edition of People in Power. If you'd like to comment on our report or any other matter, we'd love to hear from you on aljazeera.net/English. Until next time, bye-bye.